All right. Well, fantastic. Thank you guys for being here today. We're going to quickly have a couple of housekeeping items for the next few weeks. We will not be meeting for about 2 weeks. Part of that is because you have a longer than usual assignment that's associated with this particular module. And the other one is to give you a chance to start reading, if you haven't already, the second chapter out of this book, out of the course text, which we'll be talking about actually the next time I'm actually there at Olathe, which I think is October the 11th. So I'm not going to see you guys for a couple of weeks. You'll have some essay work to be doing and then plenty of reading to be doing. And I would encourage you to, to feel free to use this class time for that work. This is just a single credit hour course, so feel free to use that time for reading and working on your essays. And the essay that you're writing for this assignment is one where you will synthesize some perspectives, which I'll touch on here in the talk today, but you'll get to read about in the assigned readings. Okay. So this module is the most sociological module of DMP 888. We're going to talk about poverty on a global scale. We're going to talk about issues of wealth, so-called poor countries, so-called rich countries. You're going to have a reading from the preface of a book called The Wealth and Poverty of Nations. And then you're also going to have a chance to read some perspectives from an economic and social historian who has done a lot of research actually on the phenomenon of affluence and its relationship to such food-related public health issues as obesity. Okay? So this is in many ways more sociological, what we're doing in this particular module. One of the academic disciplines that I think is very important to draw on to better understand economic realities is economic history and also social history. So this field, economic and social history, has a number of scholars who I think ought to be celebrated. One of those is Avner Offer. I had the privilege of meeting Professor Offer at Oxford many, many years ago. He has done a lot of work on the phenomenon of self-control when it comes to eating. So many of you taking this course are studying public health. If you're, say, studying the nutrition or sort of human behavior aspects of public health, I would say you should definitely check out Professor Offer's work. And he ties a lot of the challenges of a lot of the challenges of human behavior and behavior change to this concept called affluence. And you'll actually get to read the interview that Choice magazine has of him, okay? And his book, The Challenge of Affluence, Self-Control and Well-Being in the United States and Britain Since 1950, you can get that on Amazon, or you can get that through interlibrary loan. I don't make you guys read it, but it's definitely worth reading if you find the interview that you'll read the transcript from is in any way interesting, okay? One of the many points that he makes is this idea that satiation, so enjoying things in an affluent world, maybe that's entertainment, maybe that is food, maybe that is luxury items, maybe that is things that you and I consider to be part and parcel to middle-class culture, but on a global scale is actually very rare and comparatively affluent. And he says that satiation dulls the edge of satisfaction. And in his interview that you'll read, he talks about this idea of the importance of other features of us sociologically that give us satisfaction in a more sustainable and enduring way. One of those is what he calls regard for one another. So if any of you have ever been a part of a team, you know, being a valued team member, or obviously human relationships in general tend to give a quality of life. But in affluent culture, according to Offer, there is this tendency, borne out in economic and social history, to kind of dull the edge of satisfaction by just having more, whether that's more luxury items, more money, more food, whatever. And he's not like an anti-capitalist. He's not advocating some sort of bizarre left-wing agenda. He's simply describing in historical format the things that he's observed when it comes to affluence. Okay, so you'll get to read about that. Any questions or comments about that? Who sees the issue of affluence being relevant to their work? Usually we have at least one dietitian student in this class, and they're always the one that tends to weigh in on this. But I wonder, even you, Tegan, with your sensory work, do you see anything here about anything in your world and just food research in general that would get to this issue of affluence?
I mean, we've actually done like a satiation study before. So it was like I don't know if it was a granola bar or something that they wanted it to sustain you for however long. So consumers came in and they ate it, and then 2 hours later they had to do another survey, just saying like, yes, I'm still full, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's about as far as it goes. We usually don't try to serve people more than what they can handle in one serving. So if like a soup serving is 4 ounces, we'll usually give them like 1 or 2, so it still looks like the soup, but it's not like they can't leave here having 16 bowls of soup, or you know what I mean. We just try to make it so that nobody's miserable at the last sample, because they may rate that sample worse just because they're so full.
Right, exactly. And so I would think when you pen your 400-word essay related to this module, Tegan, there may be some analogies that you can draw from the satiation analysis that you were doing in the sensory world with what Offer's talking about. Of course, many of you, no doubt, have traveled internationally. So who here has traveled outside the U.S.? Okay, where have you been? Each of you?
I've been to China.
China.
I've been to some of the British Virgin Islands.
Okay.
And I guess does Canada count?
Definitely. Did you go to the British Virgin Islands to help Richard Branson rebuild his house after the hurricane?
Yeah, yes, I did. How'd you guess?
Sadly, I think he may have to rebuild again after today.
Right.
Where else have you guys traveled?
I spent a year in Canada.
All right. Where'd you live?
Northern Alberta and Edmonton.
All right, cool. So one of the things that people oftentimes comment on when they come back to the States after being abroad is they'll go out to eat at a restaurant, and what do they observe?
I hate to say it, but more overweight people.
Okay, well, there's that. And what else? Maybe this is what I experienced. When we came back to the States, and I think we went to, actually I better not name which restaurant it was, but I was just blown away by how large the servings were.
Mm-hmm.
What is driving that? Why is it that we have larger servings? And we're not going to discuss that now, but this is the kind of question that an economic and social historian like Offer is actually interested in, okay? There's other studies that have been done on human behavior and consumption. One of the studies that I marvel at is how they had two groups, and one group was given they did it with students, which probably biased the study, but they had two groups. One group, every student was given 2 bags of popcorn, and then the other group, every student was given 1 bag of popcorn. And both groups consumed everything that was put in front of them. Okay? So whether you serve someone 1 bag or 2 bags, they consumed everything, right? And the reports back were that they were both equally satisfied. They were both, what's the term you would use, satiated, Tegan?
Yes.
They were full. Yet, it seems that for whatever reason, psychologically, sociologically, physiologically, we tend to, and I do this, we tend to eat whatever's in front of us maybe, right? Anyways, these are the kinds of things that Professor Offer talks about in his books and in the interview, okay? All right, the other reading that you're going to have is considerably shorter, and it is just the preface to this book, The Wealth and Poverty of Nations. I would highly recommend any of you who like the preface to actually get this book. I've got a copy of it actually in my office at K-State Olathe. It is a broad, sweeping summary of economic history, as well as other fields, including a lot of history of science and technology. And one of the things that he talks about in his book, in which he explains and kind of summarizes in the preface, is this idea that there are different categories of countries. Now, you're going to have a chance in the essay, and you will also have a chance in the oral exam with me at the end of the semester to contest or comment on his categories, okay? But he has different categories of these countries. He has 3 different categories that he uses, and he relates it to actually consumption, okay? And so you'll get to read about that in the preface, how the world is divided, according to Landis, into 3 kinds of nations. And I would encourage you to really reflect on his argument there. The other reading is about food prices, okay? And one of my favorite leaders, the former president of K-State, John Weefald, he actually gave a paper on this topic, this issue of food prices. And he was basically making the case for the need to protect the food and agriculture sector in the United States. And his argument was couched largely in terms of keeping food prices low, okay? So Dr. Weefald said, or remarked that America has the lowest cost food of any country on the face of the earth. The American people spend about 9 cents out of every dollar for food. And as you will read in this module's readings, that is very unusual when compared to Landis's so-called poor countries, where maybe 1/2 or 2/3 of disposable income is being spent on food. And if you're spending that much of your monthly income on food, and then there are fluctuations in food prices, that will always and forever disproportionately affect those poorer countries than, say, the United States, okay? And so that's another thing that I want you guys to be thinking about in this particular module. In the course website, actually, let me, I'm going to stop sharing and reshare my screen. There we go. You guys can see that?
Mhm.
So if you go down to Module 5, you've got these PDFs that I want you to read. So this is the preface to Landis's Wealth and Poverty of Nations. So this is relatively short. You should be able to knock that out fairly quickly. The Challenge of Affluence interview by Offer is considerably longer, okay? And I realize that for many of you, the terms that he will use are, they might not be foreign to you, but they might be terms that you don't normally use. And I would encourage you to take the time to actually interpret and even look up definitions. So when he talks about, I'm looking at a good example here.
He talks about myopic.
Yeah.
Reasoning, because I read some of this morning.
Oh, you
I
did?
had no idea. Yeah, what does that mean, myopic?
Well, if you have myopia, you are nearsighted and you can't see far. So by analogy, myopic reasoning would be you're only looking at the immediate, say, consequences, but not the long-term consequences, or the immediate benefits, but you're ignoring the long-term effects. So someone who, like me, you know, I came into the office today after lunch and I found my chocolate. I was myopically reasoning by tearing into a couple of those, right? Actually, nothing wrong with chocolate in the middle of the day, right, Tegan?
Not at all.
Yeah.
It really increases happiness if you have a little bit every day.
Exactly. But it does dull the edge of satisfaction if you eat it all day long. He talks also about this term unhappiness, okay? And these terms may sound kind of simplistic, but they are packed with sociological meaning. So take the time when you're reading Professor Offer's interview to actually be disciplined, and you're probably not going to be able to read it unless you're like Josh. You're probably not going to be able to read it just in one sitting. You may need to go back and read it in chunks, okay? And then the third item is this bit on food prices. I think this is from the FAO. This is really interesting because this begins to get into Landis's point about the different categories of countries, okay? And then those of you who, I think all of you actually, or most of you anyway, if not all of you, have completed your essay question on the different facets of security referenced in the Lloyd's food system shock scenario. And as you will recall from the Lloyd's scenario, we had a lot of lesser developed countries with political instability. Do you guys remember that? And this article explains quite well why, say, a major fungal disease in wheat in a politically unstable country could be a massive problem. And so this article goes into the economics of food prices and how that can really affect price volatility. And you can sew that perspective in as well to your essay. The essay is 400 words. And I want you to upload it as a Word document, okay? And you've got to answer all three of the questions, okay? So I touch on food price fluctuations, Professor Offer, and then Landis's categorization, okay? I do want you to cite references if you use them. So if you cite Landis, you know, use some bibliographic referencing style. I don't really care which one you use, but do document your reading. And you also may want to consult other sources. So for example, if Josh wants to go out and get a book on myopic reasoning and cite that, then that could be footnoted. Or you could just simply footnote my personal illustration of the chocolate, and that could be your source. So, and then as I mentioned at the beginning of class, we will not have class for 2 weeks, okay? So next week, no class. The 4th, no class. This is when you should be writing your essay questions or beginning to read chapter 2, which we'll be looking at in module 6. And then chapter 6 of the course text is the reading material for Module 7. Okay, so you guys do have a lot of writing and reading ahead of you. I purposefully put this a little bit later just because I know some students don't get the text immediately. But feel free to reach out to me if you've got questions, and I will actually be there in the flesh on October the 11th, guys, and I'll look forward to seeing you then. Okay? Questions? Grievances? Does this make you wonder about anything? What's the most interesting thing that you have come across in this class? Maybe two of you could share.
I'll go first. Honestly, it was this affluence thing. So doing the Dr. Offer reading.
Yeah.
I'm not, my research is not really in this area, but like my personal interest is in health and fitness. And so having affluence be another facet of the obesity academic is something that I never really thought of. I always kind of, maybe it's kind of short of me, but you know, if people are obese, maybe they got themselves in that situation, whether it be motivation, whether it be poverty, whether it be hereditary, you know, all those other things. I never thought affluence would be another contribution. So I thought that was really interesting. And I kind of wonder how much of a contribution it is, and if it's even possible. I mean, he did some of the statistical studies and stuff, but I don't know how possible it is to see how big of an impact affluence has on something like the obesity epidemic. Yeah. But I really like how he talked about the whole smoking thing and how that, let me see if I can find it, how the policy changed, how the mindset changed around the whole smoking is bad for you thing. He said, first, the scientists find this out and describe it, and then over time they persuade government, and then the middle class is persuaded, and then finally this understanding percolates lower down in the socioeconomic system, which I never really thought about. That I've done like some work in some not so good places, some pretty poor places, and the things that I understand they might not have ever heard, and how things percolate down the socioeconomic system is interesting when we talk about smoking, but then you can also think about obesity. It's the same thing. So I don't know if that's just a general comment. There's no questions there.
That's good. And I would encourage all of you, if you have to write a thesis or a report for, say, a field experience or a capstone, if there is, as you mentioned, Josh, even if it's just a small piece of the overall prism of your research area, you could give a shout out to some of the literature regarding affluence. You could cite some of Offer's books, for instance. And I think the point that I would emphasize, which Tegan heard me lecture on, remember the comment I made in 801, Tegan, about, and maybe Andy, you may recall this too, the how many problems are both personal and structural. You remember that? And I think the affluence kind of speaks to the structural side, right? So if you're swimming in economic wealth, maybe there are some structural issues that have, they might not be absolutely determinative, but they certainly have influence on, say, a public health outcome, for instance. So that's good. Maybe one more student. Who else wants to talk about something they found interesting in the course? And by the way, if you have found nothing interesting in the course, then you will really enjoy the second half of the course.
I didn't know that was an option.
What do you think, Andy?
I've taken several courses related to sustainable agriculture and feeding 9 billion people in the future. And, you know, it's not only feeding poor countries, it's the fact that, you know, countries like China that were poor are now becoming more affluent, and they're having bigger appetite for protein and more calories. So
yeah,
as we figure out a way to get the poorer countries where most of the population growth is more food secure and more economically secure, they're going to still consume more calories even though the population stops growing.
yeah.
So it's a huge challenge.
That's a really good point. And I think the positive effect of middle class growth in places like China is that will tend to, because actually China has a rampant, for example, to go back to Josh's point, smoking problem. A lot of people smoke in China, but there is a hope that as the middle class grows, that there will be a kind of a associated growth in education and exposure about, say, public health risks, human behavior risks like smoking over time. So there's definitely pros and cons to all of this, and challenges and opportunities, and good consequences and unintended consequences. And that's what I want you guys to be more and more conversant about through this class, is being able to bring more descriptive nuance to characterizing problems, whether that be a trade problem, a nutrition problem, a food safety problem, a animal disease problem, whatever it may be. Yeah. Well, I will see you guys October 11. Have fun writing. I am, as you probably have noticed, I do grade you guys on grammar. So this is your chance to wow me with your use of the semicolon. As you, but yeah, get that done, and I will see you all in 2 weeks' time. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.